Hello friends, welcome to Premier UPSC IAS. So this is the lecture 3 of modern history. As I have said earlier, we are going to cover only important topics and important points of modern history, especially pertaining to prelims examination. So let's see the growth of administrative apparatus of the British in India. Background: the need for a change in administration apparatus arose after East India Company acquired political power in 1757. Robert Clive came to be referred to as Clive of India amassed so much illegal wealth after the Battle of Plassey and Buxar. People back in England started to call him and his associates Nabobs, anglicized version of Nawabs. When he returned back to England in 1769, people were astounded with the fortune he acquired. In 1771, he was charged with corruption, bribe, and maladministration in India, and trials and inquiry for his actions in India were conducted. So the British government was no longer willing to allow the company's affairs to continue unsupervised. Clive was exonerated in 1773 after a vote, but British Parliament was still wary of the kind of administration carried out by the company officials as the company was in dire financial straits. The company was important for the British Parliament as the investors of the company were the big shots of Britain, including the Queen. Hence, the British Parliament enacted a series of laws. Regulating Act of 1773 was the first act in the row. It was aimed at curbing the company's traders' unrestrained commercial activities and to bring about some order in territories under the company control. North's Regulating Act 1773. The Act provided for the Court of Directors with a strength of 24 members who were to be elected by the Court of Proprietors. The Court of Directors would hold office for 4 years. They were required to submit all the dispatches of communication in the British Parliament coming from India. The Act prohibited the company officials from taking the bribe and doing private trade, which was also a bone of contention between the Nawab of Bengal and the East India Company. Governor of Bengal was made the Governor General of Bengal. Bombay and Madras were made subordinate to Bengal. Warren Hastings was appointed as the first Governor General of Bengal. A council of four was created to assist the Governor General of Bengal in administrative decisions, which included Commander-in-Chief as a default member. A Supreme Court was established at Fort William, Calcutta in 1774. The judges from Britain were sent to administer the British legal system in India. Elijah Impey was appointed the first Supreme Court judge. Moving forward, loopholes in the Regulating Act. There were several loopholes in the Act, mainly as the role of the Council was not defined. The jurisdiction of the Supreme Court was not demarcated, and the laws to be applied to Indians were not mentioned. In a simple case of forgery, Nand Kumar, who was an ex-Diwan of Murshidabad, was sentenced to death. Apart from that, there were constant quarrels between the Governor General of Bengal and his council. Thus, the act enacted to regulate company affairs was a failure. Pitt's India Act 1784. It was brought in to correct the mistakes of the previous legislation. The young Prime Minister of the Britain, William Pitt, was responsible for bringing the new law. Hence, the act came to be called Pitt's India Act of 1784. Provisions of the Act. A board of control with 6 members was formed. 2 of them were from British Parliament and 4 from the monarch's Privy Council. It was set up in Britain to manage the India affairs exclusively. British Parliament could finally control the civil, military and revenue affairs in India through Pitt's India Act 1784. The company, however, still retained the monopoly over trade and enjoyed its rights to appoint and dismiss officials at its will. This was a system of dual government with a court of directors for commercial affairs and board of directors for political affairs. The size of the council of Governor General was reduced to 3. Since the Governor General of Bengal was a crown appointee, he got the veto power to override the advice of the council. The members of the Governor General of Bengal's Executive Council were to be appointed from the Indian Coordinated Services. The ICS members were given the executive functions and received the patronage of Court of Directors. Importance of Pitt's India Act. The Pitt's India Act came to be known as the Constitution for India till 1858, since not many changes were made to the structure of government. It was also called the half-loaf system as it sought to mediate between Parliament and the company directors. The act that followed after this act was more or less concerned with the trading monopoly of the company and number of members in the Governor-General's Executive Council and strengthening the powers of Governor-General. Hence, the nomenclature of the acts that followed was Charter Acts. Charter here meant permission or grant to trade. There were four Charter Acts after the Pitt's India Act. The Charter Act of 1793. It extended the trading monopoly of the company for more 20 years. The Governor General now got overriding powers over the governors of the other two presidencies. The Commander in Chief, who was by default member of Executive Council, wouldn't be anymore. If they wished, he could be appointed, but not by default. The salaries of the Board of Control in Britain were to be paid by the revenues earned in India, thus started the drain of wealth. The East India Company was empowered to grant licenses to company officials or individuals to carry out the trade. This was done to enable to send shipments of opium from India to China. The Charter Act of 1813. The Charter Act of 1813 for the first time expressly asserted the Crown's sovereignty over British India. The provisions include trading monopoly of the company was abolished. However, it was extended for 20 more years only for trade in tea and trade with China. Christian missionaries were allowed to operate in India subject to the approval of Court of Directors or Board of Control. So when it comes to Christian missionaries acting in India, the Charter Act of 1813 is important. It also provided for 1 lakh rupees per annum to be spent on education in India. So education in India, Christian missionaries started from the Charter Act of 1813. The Charter Act of 1833. This act was also called the Government of India Act 1833 or St. Helena Act 1833. It is of paramount importance as it brought about a number of changes in the governance. Provisions of the Charter of Act of 1833. The Governor General of Bengal was now called the Governor General of India. William Bentinck was appointed as the Governor General of India. The legislative powers of the governors of the Bombay and the Madras were repealed. They were made total subordinates of the Governor General of India. The legislative powers were now vested with Governor General's Executive Council along with a member called Law Member. When the Law Member is a part of the council, it would be called Legislative Council. The Law Member was to act as a legal advisor in making laws who later constituted the Law Commission to codify all the laws for India. The first Law Member was Thomas Babington Macaulay. The Charter Act of 1833 also ended the monopoly of the East India Company as a commercial body. It was now solely an administrative body. A system of the open exam was introduced for the selection of civil servants. This move was opposed by the Court of Directors. They continued to hold the privilege to appoint the civil servants. This proposal was finally enacted in 1853. The Charter Act of 1853. The Act provided the company to retain its territorial positions but not for any definite period, unlike the previous charters which extended for 20 years at once. The membership of the Court of Directors was reduced from 24 to 18, and out of which 6 nominations were to be made by British Crown's Privy Council. The number of members in the Legislative Council was increased to 6 and Executive Council to 4. Civil services were finally opened for Indians. An open competitive examination was held in London for a selection. In the Charter Act of 1853. Land and revenue policies are very important from the modern history. Let's see. After acquiring the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa in 1765, the maximization of the revenue became the primary objective of the British administration. The taxation on the agricultural produce was the main source of income for the company. The company had to pay dividends to its investors and Britain, therefore, they tried out various land revenue experiments. Provincial farming, 1772. Warren Hastings introduced the system of revenue farming in 1772 in the province of Bengal. Under this system, the district collectors would farm out the right to collect revenue to the highest bidder. It was a total failure and affected the cultivators due to arbitrarily made high revenue demands. Zamindari system of 1793. Lord Cornwallis introduced a system of permanent settlement in 1793 to plug the loopholes of it. Zamindars who earlier only had the right to collect revenue were made the owners of the land, and state's demand for the land revenue from zamindars was permanently fixed. However, if the zamindars were unable to pay the full tax on time, their lands would be taken away and auctioned by the state. That is called the zamindari system or a permanent settlement, introduced by Lord Cornwallis. The aim of this system was to create an enterprising class of landowners who would try to improve crop production in their fields to earn profits. It was also easier for a state to deal with a limited number of zamindars than with every peasant. They would also get a powerful section of society loyal to the British administration, that is, zamindars. This system, however, resulted in greater impoverishment of the tenant farmers or the cultivators. The burden of high revenue demand was now put on the peasants who didn't have money to improve the cultivation. In situations of flood, disaster, or famine, it was also difficult for zamindars because of the fixed nature of revenue demand. Many zamindars who were unable to pay the revenue on time and lost their lands. It encouraged sub-infeudation, and many layers of intermediaries were created between the zamindar and the cultivator. Finally, the entire burden was on the peasantry. Rayotwari system. Rayotwari system was started by Captain Alexander Reid and Thomas Munro in the Madras Presidency. It was introduced with an aim to keep out intermediaries from revenue collection so that the state could acquire a large share of the income from land. Later, it was also extended to the Bombay Presidency as well. Under this system, revenue was initially collected from each village separately, but later each cultivator or ryot was assessed individually. Peasants were made the landowners and not the zamindars. Although the revenue collected by the state increased under this, the assessments were faulty and the peasants overburdened by the taxes. The revenue was fixed for 30 years, after which it was subject to reassessment and resettlement on new terms. The revenue rates of Rayotwari system were 50% where the lands were dry and 60% in irrigated land. The cultivator got the security of tenure, but the duty was on the higher side, thus leaving no motivation for cultivation. Mahalwari system. Since both the earlier systems had failed, that is, the Zamindari or permanent settlement and the Rayotwari, another system called the Mahalwari system was introduced in the north and the northwest, especially in Agra, our central parts of India, Punjab, parts of Gangetic Valley, etc. It was introduced by Holt Mackenzie and Robert Martins Bird. It was a mix of both the Zamindari and the Rayotwari. The land was divided into mahals, and each mahal comprised of one or more villages. The peasants owned the land, and the collection of the taxes was vested with the village committees. There were issues with the Mahalwari system as well. Though peasants were given ownership in actual practice, only some big families took the land rights, not all the villages. It couldn't fulfill the stable revenue dream of the government and was applied in a limited area as well as duration. Alongside the Mahalwari system, there was Talukdar system. According to it, the Talukdar was made the owner of the land and gave him full control over the peasants. The only difference with the Zamindari system was that this was not permanent. It was implemented only in some parts of the present-day Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and Punjab. Uprisings before 1857. This is very important to understand the revolt of 1857 per se. Resistance against the British before 1857. It is popularly believed that 1857 revolt was the first to show off resentment against the British. But there were many incidents before 1857 revolt, and there was a building resentment against the company's rule. The peasants, artisans, tribals, ruling classes, military personnel, religious leaders, etc., fought for the protection of their interests, most of the times separately and sometimes together. They can be divided into three broad forms, and each had different causative factors for rising against them: civil rebellions, tribal uprisings, and peasant movements. Causative factors for the peasants' uprisings. The extractive land revenue settlements that we have studied earlier, that is the Zamindari, the Rayotwari, and the Mahalwari, imposed a heavy burden of new taxes on peasants, resulted in the eviction of peasants from their lands and encroachments on tribal lands. There was exploitation of the rural society by the ever increasing demands of intermediary revenue collectors, tenants, and the money lenders. Loss of the tribal people holds over agricultural and the forest land. British manufactured goods were promoted and the heavy export duties were levied on the Indian industries, leading to the devastation of the indigenous handloom and handicraft industries. It leads to the migration of workers from industry to agriculture, increasing the pressure on the land. Civil uprisings. The civil uprisings include those not related to defense or military, but by the civil society. Major cause of the civil uprisings were the exploitative role of the company led to rapid changes in the economy, administration, land revenue that went against the people. Erstwhile zamindars and the poligarchs who lost control over their land and its revenues wanted to settle there with the company. The traditional zamindaris and the poligarchs were hurt as they were sidelined in rank by the government officials, and a new class comprising of merchants and moneylenders came into existence. The loss of handicraft industries impoverished millions of artisans because of the duties. The rulers, princes, the chieftains, the zamindars who patronized them also lost power, further compounding the misery of artisans. The religious leaders in the priestly classes also instigated hatred and rebellion against the alien rule because they were dependent on the traditional landed and the bureaucratic elite. The fall of the feudal lords directly affected them. Let's see one by one. Sannyasi rebellion. Only we will cover only the important point because the term and the important points related to the term only will be expected for prelims. Sannyasi rebellion. The continuous famines in this period in the Bengal region compelled a group of sannyasis to fight the British yoke. They were joined by a large number of dispossessed small zamindars, disbanded soldiers, and rural poor. They raided the company factors and the treasuries and fought the company's forces. Warren Hastings could subdue the sannyasis only after a prolonged action. There was equal participation of Hindus and Muslims, so sometimes was referred to as Fakir rebellion. Anandamat, written by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, based on the Sannyasi revolt. This is important. He also wrote Devi Chaudhurani, a novel about women too taking up the struggle against an alien rule that posed a threat to traditional Indian values. So, Anandamat and Devi Chaudhurani, written by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. Following were important leaders of Sannyasi revolt: Majnum Shah or Majnu Shah, Chirag Ali, Musa Shah, Bhavani Pathak, and Devi Chaudhurani. Midnapur revolt of 1766 and 74. Sometimes this revolt could be asked in a chronological order. The English took hold of Midnapur in 1760. The 3,000 zamindars and the talukdars here had cordial relations with their ryots. But the introduction of the new land revenue system by the English in 1772 changed it. The zamindars of Midnapur, along with the ryots, revolted against the English revenue collecting officials. The zamindars of areas around Midnapur, that is Dhalbhum, Manbhum, Raipur, Panchet, Jatimuni, Karnagar, and Bagri, were ultimately dispossessed of their zamindaris by 1800s. The important leaders of the revolt were Damodar Singh, Jagannath Dhal. So the leaders of Midnapur revolt were Damodar Singh and Jagannath Dhal. Polyguards revolt of 1795 to 1805. The Polyguards of South India gave a stiff resistance to the British between 1795 and 1805. They revolted in Tirunelveli, Ramanathapuram, Sivaganga, Shivagiri, Madurai, and North Arcot. In 1781, the Nawab of Arcot gave the control of Tirunelveli and the Carnatic provinces to the East India Company. This caused resentment among the Polygarchs as they considered themselves as independent sovereign authorities within their respective territories. First phase. The first revolt of the Polygarchs against the company was basically over taxation, but had a larger political dimension also. The English from then treated the Polygarchs as enemies. Kattabomman Nayakam led the first phase of insurrection between 1795 and 1799. A fierce battle was fought. The company forces were defeated by Veerapandiya Kattabomman. This led to greater rebellion by the Polygarchs, but with the arrival of reinforcements, the company forces, English were finally able to defeat the Kattabomman. He fled into the Pudukottai forest and a betrayal of Ettappan, the Raja of Pudukottai. The Raja entered into an agreement with the British and it led to the capture of Kattabomman. Kattabomman was hanged in a conspicuous place and his associates were arrested. The second phase of the Polygarch struggle, the second phase was more violent than the previous one. It started in 1801 when the Polygarchs imprisoned in the fort of Palmakotta were able to escape. They took control of many forts and even captured Tuticorin. The British forces were soon reinforced from Malabar. Omaiturai, brother of Kattabomman, joined the rebellion of the Marudus led by Maruthu Pandian. They were suppressed in October 1801. But between 1803 and 1805, the Polygarchs of the North Arcot rose in rebellion when they were deprived of their right to collect the Kawal fees. By February 1805, all the rebels were suppressed. The Polygar rebellion spread over a vast area of South India. It was one of the major mass movements against the alien rule, seeking the independence of them. Resistance of Kerala Varma from 1793 to 1805. Kerala Varma Padasi Raja, popularly known as Kerala Simham, the Lion of Kerala, or Saike Raja. He was the de facto head of the Kottayam in the Malabar region and fought against the British between 1793 and 1805. After the fall of Mysore, the English appointed Veeravarma, the uncle of Padasi Raja, as a Raja of Kottayam. But the revenue fixed by the company was exorbitant, and this led to a mass resistance by the peasants under the leadership of Padasi Raja in 1793. Padasi Raja fought bravely using the guerrilla warfare and a peace treaty was made in 1797. Another conflict arose over a dispute on Wayanad in 1800. He organized a large force of Nayars which was supplemented by Mapillas and the Pathans. Finally, in November 1805, the Kerala Simham died in a gunfight at Mavilatodu near current-day Kerala-Karnataka border. Revolt of Diwan Velu Tampi from 1808 to 1809. The company's harsh conditions were imposed on the state of Travancore after a subsidiary alliance by Wellesley in 1805. It caused deep resentment in the region and the ruler was not able to pay the subsidy and fell in arrears. The British resident of Travancore was meddling in the internal affairs of the state. This compelled the Prime Minister of the Diwan Velu Tampi to rise against the company assisted by the Nayar troops. Velu Tampi addressed the gathering in Kundara calling for taking up arms against the British. This has been called the Kundara Proclamation in the later years. There was a large-scale rebellion against the British as a result. A military operation was undertaken by the company to restore the peace. The ruler of Travancore had not wholly supported the rebellion and defected to the side of the company. Velutampi killed himself to avoid capture and the rebellion subsided. Paika rebellion of 1817. The Paikas of Odisha were the traditionally landed militia. Paikas literally means foot soldiers. They enjoyed rent-free land tenures for their military service and policing functions on a hereditary basis. After the company's conquest of Odisha in 1803, the Raja of Khurda was dethroned and greatly reduced the power and prestige of the Paikas. The land revenue policy was extortionist and caused resentment among zamindars and peasants alike. The people were affected by the higher prices of salt as taxes were imposed on it. The Kauri currency was also abolished and the payment of taxes was to be done in silver. This added to the resentment. Bakshi Jagabandhu Bidyadhar was the military chief of the forces of the Raja of Khurda. In 1814, his ancestral estate was taken over by the company. Mukunda Deva, the last Raja of the Khurda, and other zamindars of the region supported Bakshi Jagabandhu Bidyadhar. He led a sun-dry army of the Paikas and forced the company forces to retreat for a time. This rebellion came to be known as Paika Bidroha Rebellion. The initial success caused the entire Odisha to rise in arms against the British government for some time. The company was though successful in capturing Khurda under its control. By mid-1817, the Paika rebels now resorted to guerrilla tactics. The rebellion was brutally repressed by 1818. The priests at the Puri temple who had sheltered Jagabandhu were also caught and hanged. Pikes won the whole, suffered greatly, and in 1825 Jagabandhu surrendered under the negotiated terms. This is, however, disputed by some sources. They say he was captured and died in captivity in 1829. The Pike Rebellion was successful in getting large remissions of arrears, reductions in assessments, suspension of the sale of estates of defaulters, and a new settlement on fixed tenure was arrived at. A home revolt of 1828. The British had pledged to withdraw from Assam from the First Burma War 1824 to 26. However, after the war, they backtracked and attempted to incorporate the Ahom's territories in the company's dominion. This led to a rebellion in 1828 under the leadership of Gomdhar Konwar, an Ahom prince, along with Dhananjoy Bargohain and Jairam Khargaria Phukan. The rebels proclaimed Gomdhar Konwar the king. The company decided to follow a conciliatory policy and handed over Upper Assam to Maharaja Purandar Singh Narendra, and part of the kingdom was resorted to the Assamese king. Surat salt agitations of 1840s. The government's step to raise the salt duty from 50 paise to 1 rupee invited a strong anti-British sentiment. It resulted in attacks by the local Surat population on the Europeans in 1844. Faced with the popular movement, the government withdrew the additional salt levy. Again in 1848, the government was forced to withdraw its measure to introduce Bengal standard weights and measures in face of the people's determined bid to resort to boycotting and passive resistance. Surat salt agitations of 1840 important because of the Bengal standard weights and measures. Thank you. So this was all about the uprisings or the resentments before the 1857 revolt.